Good morning, you're watching GB News. Coming up on the political correction, mandatory vaccinations and another lockdown for Austria. The Church of England says they're not aware of asylum system abuses following the Liverpool bombers' conversion to Christianity. And former Daily Mail editor Paul Dacre quits the race to become the media's regulator. That plus plenty more after the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Simon Pusey. This is your news at 10 o'clock. There's been a second night of violence in the Netherlands, with dozens of people being arrested in The Hague. Protesters set fires in the streets and threw fireworks at police as they demonstrated against tough new COVID measures. It comes a day after riots in Rotterdam, where at least 7 people were injured. Thousands of people have also been demonstrating across other European countries, including Austria, Italy and Croatia.
So, for example, look at Austria going down the lines of mandatory vaccination. They would justify any challenge in the ECHR on the grounds of proportionality, and health and national security are pretty much universally permitted by the Human Rights Court to justify interventions.
The Foreign Office says China must provide verifiable evidence that tennis player Peng Shuai is safe and well. The latest video, posted by Chinese state media, appears to show her at a tennis tournament in Beijing. Fellow players, the UN and the White House have also voiced their concern for the welfare of the Wimbledon doubles champion. The player disappeared after she made sexual assault allegations against a former Chinese government official 3 weeks ago. More migrants, including very young children, have illegally crossed the Channel in the past 24 hours. Official figures haven't been confirmed, but it's believed hundreds have made the journey. More than 24,700 people have arrived in the UK so far this year. The UK's Brexit minister says the country will need to safeguard its position in other ways if it's not able to reach an agreement with the EU over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Lord Frost says there's momentum for the government to secure a solution based on consensus following a meeting in Brussels with the European Commission Vice President. It comes hours after protesters gathered at the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, demanding post-Brexit arrangements to be protected. Author and political commentator Kevin McGeer told GB News the UK is still weighing up the EU's proposals.
Nub of it is, can that process be smooth? Now, the European Union is saying, look, we're prepared to reduce paperwork checks by 50% and checks on goods coming in by 80%. And that should ensure that there is much more smooth trading between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The question really for Lord Frost, the government's Brexit negotiator and the minister leading negotiations with the European Union, and his counterpart, Maros Sefcovic, is that broadly enough?
Children under the age of 12 could be given COVID vaccine from next year. A leaked proposal shows health bosses are preparing to vaccinate children aged between 5 and 11 next spring. That's according to a report in the Sun newspaper. It comes as over 40s will be able to book their COVID booster jab from tomorrow in England. NHS England says around 500,000 people in their 40s are currently eligible for the third jab. Meanwhile, the Health Secretary is ordering a review into whether medical devices are biased against race or gender. New research suggests oximeters, which are devices clipped to your finger, can overstate the level of oxygen in the blood of those from ethnic minorities. Ministers are trying to find out if the bias could have stopped patients receiving appropriate COVID treatment. Sajid Javid said any bias is totally unacceptable. And Facebook says encrypted messaging will not be completed until some point in 2023. The company says they're taking time to get it right, following fears that it could put children at greater risk of exploitation and abuse. End-to-end encryption hides messages from everyone except those in a conversation. Meta, the brand which heads up the social media network, has pledged to strike a balance between privacy and safety online. Well, that's it from me for now. I'll have more in around half an hour's time. Now it's back to the political correction.
Good morning, you're watching GB News and this is The Political Correction. I'm Deanna Davison.
I'm Nigel Farage.
And we're joined here in the studio by Paul Embry and from Northern Ireland by Arlene Foster.
We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge of the debate.
Coming up this hour, protests on the streets of Vienna. From tomorrow, Austria heads back into full lockdown, with other European countries considering tighter measures. Could it happen here in the UK?
The Church of England says they're not aware of asylum abuse cases following the Liverpool bombers' conversion to Christianity.
Plus, the eastern leg of HS2 is scrapped. Does this further open up the north-south divide?
If there's anything today that you want to get involved in with this discussion, please let us know. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. This is The Political Correction.
From tomorrow, Austria will go into full lockdown to avoid what it's being called the fifth wave. The Austrian Chancellor says the lockdown will last between 10 and 20 days and is because of a rise in COVID cases. Let's hear what he had to say earlier this week.
As of tomorrow, every citizen, every person living in Austria must be aware that they can be checked by the police at any time. Among other things, we will also check if people have been vaccinated or recovered and the reason for entering public spaces.
In the meantime, COVID vaccinations will become mandatory from the beginning of February. This comes after several European countries imposed strict restrictions on who decided not to get vaccinated. Well, I have to say, I don't know what the rest of the panel think, but to me, for the state to say that you absolutely have to get the vaccine, and if you don't, you can be fined or perhaps even put in prison. I think this is a step too far. What say you, Deanna?
I completely agree with you, actually, Nigel. I think there's a difference between saying, every citizen must be vaccinated and saying, for example, nurses and doctors and people working in a particular industry that's particularly kind of vulnerable must be. I think it's a completely different thing. It's more about a sort of condition of employment rather than a sort of a legal thing, rather than, as you said, you could be fined or even arrested for not getting vaccinated. We must remember this is a medical intervention. I think we must give people the choice and give people the information to make an informed choice, show them that it's safe, show them that a lot of research has been done into the vaccine, and run a really good kind of public programme of communications to encourage take-up. But I certainly don't think it should be made into something that's legal and enforced.
But you can do that. I mean, look, about 12%, Paul, of this country have not had the vaccine, despite a tidal wave, of publicity to say that they should. 50,000 people left the care sector 2 weeks ago because they chose not to have the vaccine. We're likely to have something very similar happening with the National Health Service from the 1st of April next year. And, there is a great danger, isn't there, in creating two very distinct tiers of society. And Austria is leading the way. I wonder, we've seen some sort of mini riots and protests going on in Vienna, equally overnight. In the Netherlands, several cities, and kind of the Netherlands are protesting, I think, about what may happen if they were to go down the Austrian route. How do you feel about it?
Well, I tend to agree. I think we're all going to share the same opinion on this one. I find it deeply sinister, actually. I find it very totalitarian, the idea that, as you said, Diana, a government can say to you, you are going to have a particular medical intervention whether you want it or not. Now, I agree that there are probably some circumstances where if you have a particular job and there's a risk assessment done on it, then you can say, well, it's a part of your condition of employment, it's necessary for these reasons for you to have it. But to have a generalised order go out saying you have to have this medical intervention, I think is really sinister. In terms of the UK, Nigel, I think a year ago I would have rejected any suggestion that that sort of thing couldn't happen here. I still don't think it will happen here. But I'm less sure about it. When you see the mission creep we've had in the UK over the last year, I'm less sure about that now.
No, and the other point, and both of you mentioned, jobs such as the care sector, the health sector. I'd agree with you if I thought that by having the vaccine, I couldn't contract the virus and pass it on. But so even there, I'm beginning to feel more nervous about this than I was before.
And what will it mean for for social care? What will it mean for the National Health Service if suddenly those services are denuded of tens of thousands of people? Bearing in mind the pressure on the services at the moment.
Already.
So this is very high stakes. This is a big gamble because you may end up driving thousands of those people away.
Well, joining us live from Austria to tell us more is journalist and expat Alex Story. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning.
So tell us, what's the key reasoning? We can hear you. What's the key reasoning behind the new lockdown? Is it to do with vaccine uptake or has there been a huge rise in cases?
Well, officially, that's an interesting question. Officially, it's because there's been a rise in cases to something like 11 or 12,000. The difficulty for me is that when you look at the facts from, or the data from the OECD and such organizations, Austria is actually not doing that badly. Austria, in terms of vaccination rate, is in the middle. It's neither good nor bad. It has a very, very small number of deaths that come from COVID. So the question is, why is it happening now? So partially, one of the things that we have to understand is how important the tourism sector is to Austria. And one of the things that the Austrian government had mentioned a couple of years ago, and again last year, is one of the things they wanted to do is to ensure that the skiing season was left open. And one of the things that they're trying to do now is to try and appear tough in order to be able to keep the very important December, January, February months open for skiing. Now, that's obviously not something that a lot of people might speak about in the UK, but Austria, I think, depends 18% of its GDP on tourism. So it's very important to bear that in mind.
Alex, I understand that the Freedom Party, the right of centre, right of centre Freedom Party, are making a stand against mandatory vaccination. Is there any polling on this subject? I mean, do most people in Austria support this?
Well, actually, what's interesting about this is that what we had in Vienna it was the biggest or the second largest demonstration in the Second Republic of Austria. So when was that introduced? 1948. The numbers vary between 40,000 to 170,000, depending on who you are. The interesting thing is the eclectic nature of the people that you saw there. It's very easy to try and politicize it, but actually when you saw the people there, and I know quite a few who went because they're friends, there were doctors, there were healthcare workers, there were professors from universities who are not very keen on having a mandate of any sort. But what's interesting is what you say, the only party that makes the stand on this issue is the FPÖ. And what does that mean? It means that, of course, the media then attaches this eclectic group of people to a political party, where actually it's just normal people having a very, very strong feeling against this mandate, against this breach of human rights in a way.
I understand that, Alex. And what's your position? I mean, you're there, you're an expat living there, so presumably if you want to stay there and work after February, you will have to have the vaccine as well, yeah?
Well, so the issue for me is simply that the Austrian Republic is imposing itself in family matters because, like most of us, I'm married, it's a constant discussion. I'm trying to be polite because my wife is probably watching this somewhere else, and I want to have a nice Sunday. It's a sunny day, and I want to be able to enjoy it. So I'll try and be as circumspect as I can. There are lots of issues on which my wife and I don't agree on, and so the vaccination thing is one of these things. And so the Austrian Republic is forcing the issue on either me or my wife. And what does that mean? It means that I'm going to be siding on my wife's side. But we have this replicated across Austria. There are about 2 million or more people who are not vaccinated, and that means about 3 million households where one member of the family is not vaccinated, and that means that they are forced either to make a choice. The choice is we go with the government or we go with our spouses. And of course, in the end, it's the spouse, hopefully, that wins. So at the moment, what it means for me is, thankfully, I've got most of my work outside of Austria. I live in Austria, but I travel quite a lot. So I'm not really affected by this. What's really difficult is for people who who work in the public sector and who are bullied daily into making a stand and to taking this vaccine. It's really awful to live in a country that forces you to do things like that.
It's pretty astonishing. Alex Story, thank you for joining us from Austria this morning. Arlene, where do you stand on the whole question of vaccine passports?
Well, there's a difference between vaccine passports and compulsory vaccination. In terms of compulsory vaccination, I think it is very concerning to hear what's happening in Austria and the totalitarianism that is being forced on their people. And I think we should be concerned And I think Paul's absolutely right. If you'd have suggested a year ago that this might happen within the United Kingdom, you would have said stuff and nonsense. There's no way this will happen. But I think, there has been mission creep in all of this. I fundamentally believe in the vaccine. I have the vaccine myself. I think people should get the vaccine, but you cannot impose that on a free society. And I think that there's a real problem there, Nigel, and something that we should all be very concerned about. In terms of what has happened in Northern Ireland, the executive has decided to impose COVID passports for hospitality, for cinemas, for theatres from the middle of December. There's no detail yet as to how that's going to be enforced or how indeed the hospitality sector is going to be able to resource all of that, because I think we need to remember that the emphasis will be on places like hotels, like restaurants, actually enforcing the COVID passport. So that means more resource for struggling hospitality outlets, and I think government is obliged to look at all of that. It has been in place in the Republic of Ireland, the COVID passport system, since I think July of this year. And yet their cases are very high at present. So I'm concerned about the efficacy of COVID passports. If it works, then of course we should perhaps look at it. But I'm not sure that it does work. People point to the fact that since it was announced that the executive has gone down the road of announcing COVID passports, that the vaccination rates have slightly increased in Northern Ireland, but they don't come into force until the middle of December. And I think that's the key element of it. Are they effective? And if they are effective, well, let's see the data as to how they are working.
Yeah, and Paul, in a sense, vaccine passports, it's almost a form of mandatory vaccination if you want to live a normal life.
Well, this is the thing. People's freedoms and liberties are extremely important. And if you effectively, by default, constrain those liberties by saying that unless you get the vaccine passport, then you're going to be cooped up under house arrest for the rest of your life. Then exactly. It's the same outcome, albeit by a different means. And fundamentally un-British, I have to say. No one's saying that the virus isn't serious for a relatively small number of people. Clearly it is. And it's absolutely right that those people who are under threat from it get the vaccine. But actually, I'm worried about what has been a lack of proportion in this debate from the outset. It isn't the Black Death. It's serious, but it's not the Black Death and doesn't present a serious threat to the vast majority of the population. But I think too many of our government officials and public officials are acting as though it did.
Yeah, it does seem, doesn't it, Deanna, that, around the fringes, there are people urging more centralisation of power. And we see vaccine passports, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, going much further with restrictions since the beginning of the pandemic than England. How would you feel if you were to go for a drink after work and you were asked to show a vaccine passport to get into the pub? Would you be happy to show it?
To be honest, I wouldn't, personally, because I think, we've done such a good job through the vaccination programme. We're seeing our case rates in a pretty good place at the moment, particularly if you look at us compared to Europe. I think actually our handling's been pretty top-notch. So to then kind of revert and introduce new measures when actually the overall performance is pretty good, most of the people who are presenting in hospital are people who've been unvaccinated. The people who have been vaccinated are not particularly getting that ill. If they do catch the virus, fewer people are catching, because as we know, the vaccine does have some impact on your ability to transmit to others to a small extent. So I just think it's a bit of an unnecessary step backwards when actually we're making such good progress. And it comes down to this feeling of, as you said there, Paul, it doesn't feel very British.
And the debate, I think, isn't over. If you look at a country like Sweden, which has taken a more relaxed approach to issues like lockdown and vaccine passports, etc., currently has the lowest COVID infection rates in Western Europe. So I know we've kind of got into this habit of thinking, lockdown has been proven to be absolutely the right thing to do. Well, we haven't yet quantified the effects of lockdown. In the long term, I think we're going to see some very serious effects, not just in terms of the economy, in terms of undetected heart disease, health, cancers, etc. But we need to look at evidence from elsewhere in the world where they've taken a different approach and haven't fared any worse, apparently, because of that. So the debate needs to go on.
No, it does, and Florida's the same. You compare Florida with California, similar climates, both took very different approaches, and yet the outcomes are the same. California locking down, Florida staying relatively open. The thing that worries me most about all of this is Gibraltar. Gibraltar, one of the most heavily vaccinated populations in the world. And yes, they do live quite close together, I get that. But COVID rates now surging in Gibraltar, and Christmas effectively cancelled. So this has all got a lot further to run, I'm afraid.
Well, stay with us, because coming up, we discuss the comments by the Church of England this week, which says they are not aware of any link between conversion and asylum system abuse after it emerged the Liverpool bomb attacker had become a Christian. Don't go away.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show, Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction with me, Nigel Farage, Deanna Davison, Arlene Foster and Paul Embry. Arlene, you have a story about the Liverpool bomber for us.
Yes, thanks, Nigel. So the Church of England have said that they're not aware of any link between the conversion to Christianity and abuse of the asylum system after it emerged that the Liverpool bomb attacker had converted to Christianity. He was also a failed asylum seeker. He had been refused permission to stay in the UK as far back as 2014. And now we have newspaper reports suggesting that changing religion could be a way to tame the asylum system. Now, as an Anglican myself, I find this deeply, deeply concerning. If the church is being complicit in keeping people who could be potentially dangerous to all of us here in the UK. And I've noticed today that people are talking about asylum seekers getting tattoos of crucifixes and of Jesus to show to asylum system tribunals that they are Christians, and if they were sent back to their home country, that they would be the subject of abuse. So I think this is a real issue for the church, and you can't just say we're not aware of this happening, because if you look at the hundreds of asylum seekers who apparently were confirmed in the same cathedral as the Liverpool bomb attacker, those were all asylum seekers. And it's interesting, is it not, that there isn't the same number of Muslims coming forward to convert to Christianity who are already British citizens. There is a little Latin phrase in the law, Nigel, res ipsa loquitur. The facts speak for themselves. And I think this is a perfect example of the facts speaking for themselves. Do you not agree?
Yeah, no, I do very much. But I mean, I have to say to you, as an Anglican, that I'm afraid under the current leadership of the Anglican Church, nothing surprises me. And I think it's a church that is in very, very real trouble. The one thing that I'm curious about is why do they bother? Why bother getting a tattoo? Why bother getting christened or confirmed into the Anglican Church? Because basically, people who fail their asylum claims get to stay here anyway, don't they? And isn't that the real scandal about last week? Isn't that the thing that really is making the public mad? That, as you say, this guy, as long ago as 2014, was refused asylum, refused refugee status, and yet he was still in the country. Isn't that the real issue here?
Well, I think that is a real scandal, but I also am very concerned that the church should be complicit in any of this. Sure. The fact that hundreds of asylum seekers have been confirmed in one cathedral says to me that there is a systematic approach to this whole issue, that people are actually saying to asylum seekers, if you become a Christian, then that's something that you can use in your tribunal to try and stay within the United Kingdom. I mean, that is a scandal for the church. And to say just that we're not aware of this happening is just not good enough, Nigel, as far as I'm concerned.
No, Arlene, you're right. It looks like that particular cathedral has been taken completely and utterly for a ride. It really, really does.
I mean, there's a danger, isn't there, that I hear everything that Arlene says, but there's a danger that the blame gets deflected onto the Church of England here, rather than, as you touched on, Nigel, the people who are really responsible for a failing, dysfunctional system, which is the Home Office. Now, it seems to me, of course, any church is going to be in the business of trying to convert people to its religion, to its denomination. It's what they're in business for. Although, of course, where conversions are found to be bogus and deliberately bogus, that, of course, needs to be challenged. I completely agree with Arlene on that. But the real culprits, I think, in this whole scenario is a Department of Government which should have deported this individual in 2015, didn't, and that ultimately has got to be where the blame lies, surely.
One of the issues is actually the process of deporting, though, because you see what happens. You know, someone puts an asylum claim in, it's rejected because it's completely spurious, and then there are legal challenges after legal challenge after legal challenge after legal challenge. And through the new, Nationality and Borders Bill, which is currently going through Parliament, it's in the report stage at the moment, Labour have kind of consistently pushed back against any kind of attempts to tighten up and to try and stop those legal challenges from being launched at the last minute. So I kind of don't really see a decent solution at the moment.
That is true.
Without
getting this bill through Labour haven't been in government for 11 years.
And
I was astounded to hear, Priti Patel talk about this was the result, the Liverpool bomber, this was the result of a dysfunctional, broken asylum.
They've been in charge for 11 years.
Well, you've been running the thing for the last 11 years. If you haven't got a grip at it, you need to look at
the other elephant in the room here that nobody wants to talk about, it's all too difficult, is, of course, that whilst we've got Brexit, we've stayed part of the European Convention on Human Rights, and that court in Strasbourg can still make those judgments, and it's that, Deanna, it's that, as Boris calls them, the lefty lawyers. It's all so funny, Boris, isn't it? The lefty lawyers use the European Convention on Human Rights, it's right to life, it's all of those things. And frankly, all the while we stay signed up to the ECHR, I don't think we're going to see failed asylum seekers being deported in any significant numbers at all. That's my view. Dinner tomorrow, it is the funeral of Sir David Amess. And we were commenting before going on air that it's only a month ago that a member of Parliament was murdered doing a surgery, and yet his name has disappeared from news bulletins. We're not even discussing it. And the comparison was made to the street murder of Joe Cox back in 2016, where we did talk about that for a long, long time. Is it, ask the rest of you, is it that we've become just inured to this, that we just accept that MPs are going to get killed, or is something else going on, Paul?
I tend to agree. There's been nothing like the reaction to Sir David Amess as there was to Joe Cox. Both of them were absolutely horrendous murders. There's no question about it. But it's almost as if there's a hierarchy in some people's minds. And I think that's a very dangerous thing, because these were two human beings, two MPs going about their jobs, doing their work diligently. And both murders were equally outrageous. But it does seem to me There's been much less public comment and outrage over the murder of Sir David Amess, and it seems to have passed through the news much more quickly than it did for Joe Cox. And, you know, I suspect there are all sorts of reasons for that. I suspect that some people on, if you like, my side of politics think that people like Sir David Amess are probably less worthy of the news when they're attacked in that way. I think also the fact that Joe Cox was murdered by a far-right activist and Sir David Amess was murdered, allegedly, we should say, and appears to have had an Islamist dimension to it, potentially. And people are worried about discussing that. There seems to be a real reluctance on the part of some people to have an open and honest debate about that, and I think that's ultimately quite dangerous.
Is that, Arlene, how it feels to you?
Yes, unfortunately. And I mean, obviously, tomorrow and on Tuesday, when there is a service in Westminster Cathedral, I've no doubt that the news agenda will turn again to Sir David Amess and the fact that he was murdered in such a dreadful way. But I have just felt, you know, between the time of his murder and his funeral, it has gone completely from the news agenda, and it should not have. We should still be talking about this parliamentarian who was simply doing his job in a constituency surgery, and the awfulness of the fact that someone could walk in and murder him in cold blood in the way that they did. That should still be, there should be still a sense of outrage around that. And I find it strange that people are not talking about that. And I think we do need to talk about it here on GB News so that we can say to our viewers that it's something that should not be tolerated and something that we need to keep talking about.
Yeah, I think it's this point about kind of getting desensitised to these horrendous terror attacks. There have actually been so many over the past 5 to 6 years. I think you kind of see it in the news now, and it sort of dominates for a few days to a week, and then we move on to the next crisis or whatever it were. But it shouldn't be like that. I mean, this was an attack on democracy, pure and simple, and I can certainly say in Parliament that this hasn't been forgotten. You know, I walk past David's office every day to get to my own. I see the sort of big knight that he had on his door after he got knighted, which was, you know, just his humour through and through. And I know that there is still this sense of, I don't quite want to say fear, but a sense of apprehension when people are going about their constituency duties now.
Oh,
we're still getting briefings about security. We're still having to check in with the police to let them know where we're going to be. I held a surgery and there were kind of locked doors and key fobs, and I've never done anything like that before. Usually I kind of rock up and chat to people in a very open forum, and so it certainly hasn't been forgotten amongst kind of the kind of politicos who do this day in, day out, who do the same sort of public service as David does. And I think it is kind of a real kind of shame that this still isn't getting more focus. But I suppose when the trial gets started, then this probably will appear in the media again, and we'll get a few more answers.
I think, I mean, in terms of the desensitisation point, I mean, I think that's a valid point. I mean, if you look at what happened last Sunday, where, so it would appear, an individual tried to detonate a bomb at a maternity hospital containing untold numbers of new mothers and babies. That seems to me about as horrific and outrageous as it can possibly get. But again, it seems to have passed through the news fairly quickly. I mean, this is, and you know, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that we should deliberately stoke outrage and we should go around, you know, provoking anger. But it seems to me a natural reaction to something like that should be a sense of outrage, a sense of really wanting to understand what the motivations were, why it happened, being honest about that and having an honest debate about it, rather than saying, well, of course it's terrible, but these things happen, let's move on. That's not the way to respond to it, in my view.
No, and of course much of this links back to what is going on across the English Channel on a daily basis. And if people start to see that those that come into Britain illegally fail with their asylum claims, yet still stay, and some of them, even if it's a minute percentage, can be a danger, that kind of makes the whole Channel thing much bigger and much more serious. And we'll talk about that later on in the programme, I promise you, because it's one of the big front page stories today, the impact that the Channel crisis is having on the government. One or two thoughts from you coming in. On COVID, Wendy says, the vaccine protects you. If other people do not wish to have the vaccine, that is their democratic choice. However, people who refuse the vaccine do not have priority in the event of a shortage to an intensive care bed if needed. Well, Wendy, I don't think intensive care works like that, I have to say.
Well, I've got Mel here who says on the asylum point that you were just talking about, Nigel.
Yeah.
Legislate to make it impossible for anyone entering the country illegally to enter the asylum system or have any access to benefits of any kind. Secondly, withdraw all legal aid after any asylum claim is refused in the first instance. This will stop lawyers representing failed asylum seekers as they won't get paid to do so. Well, there are going to be some changes coming through the Nationality and Borders Bill if it does get approved, so watch this space, Mel.
And we've got one from Donald on a similar theme, says, what are the panel's view on Denmark returning migrants back to Syria? And the Danish situation is interesting because the Social Democrats in Denmark, which is the equivalent of the British Labour Party, have actually taken quite a robust line in terms of controlling their borders, in terms of managing immigration properly, and it has done them no harm at all in terms on that particular issue. It's done them no harm at all in terms of the polls, and that might be a lesson. It ought to be a lesson for other
I think, you know, as I said, we're going to do a big chunk on what's been happening in the Channel this week, and the fact that the Home Office have still not released the figures for Tuesday. We still don't know how many people were processed through that centre in Dover from Tuesday. I wonder what they've got to hide. And when we get to that, we will certainly discuss Denmark, because it is very relevant. We'll also have a look back at Australia in 2012. We faced a very similar... Because actually what the public want here isn't just an analysis of isn't it awful. You know, they really genuinely do want some solutions. Now, next, we'll look at Home Secretary Priti Patel's comments from Friday, where she says the Palestinian militant group Hamas should be declared as a terrorist organisation. Don't go away.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, being the manager of a Premier League football club is a very volatile, dangerous business. And indeed, Manchester United's board held an urgent meeting to discuss the immediate future of manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer last night after another 4-1 defeat to Watford. And we're joined by Aidan McGee. Aidan, the writing was on the wall last night with this, wasn't it, really?
Oh, without doubt. I mean, it's been untenable for him, I would suggest, for the last month or so. But I will pick you up on just Manchester United's statement in the last few minutes. They've announced literally in the last 2 or 3 minutes that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has left his role as manager. And the wording is very important there because they were careful not to use the word sacking. They wanted to respect his previous role at the club. He's a legendary striker, scored the winner in the Nou Camp in the famous treble-winning season of 98-99. They've gone on to say, Ole will always be a legend at Manchester United, and it is with great regret that we have reached this difficult decision. While the past few weeks have been disappointing, they should not obscure all the work he has done over the last 3 years to rebuild the foundations for for long-term success. Ole leaves with our sincerest thanks for his tireless efforts as manager and our very best wishes for the future. As I say, it was untenable. We knew last night they weren't expected to lose 4-1 at Watford. They've kept one clean sheet in 25 matches. They've taken 4 points from the last 21. They've not won a trophy in the last 3 years. There was that anaemic, lifeless performance in the Europa League final back in May in Gdansk, which I was at. He's had an easy ride from the media and also an easy ride from his former teammates who are currently in the media on places like Sky and BT. They haven't stuck the knife in where possibly it needed to be done.
But it is a perilous job, isn't it?
Oh, hugely, Nigel. I mean, look, let's not be too sorry for him. The reports are that he's going to get £7.5 million for this job. It's not a bad payout for failure, isn't it? It's nice work if you can get it.
Isn't it?
Exactly.
And who do we reckon are the front runners for the job?
I think Erik ten Hag is trending at the moment on Twitter. He's with Ajax. Took Ajax to the Champions League semi-final in 2019. A very, very serious guy, but crucially, from Man United's point of view, he's run a big club already in Holland. Ajax, the front runners over there season after season in terms of their size. They get 60,000 crowd, so he knows how to manage expectations. He's also got no baggage in the Premier League. If they went for Brendan Rodgers at Leicester, for example, you're looking at someone who's previously managed Liverpool. A couple of bad results and suddenly he's the old Liverpool manager. They go for somebody else who's in the Premier League or been in the Premier League recently, Mauricio Pochettino at PSG, for example. There's baggage there as well. This guy comes with a clean slate. Doesn't mean he's going to be able to manage Manchester United, but it's reached the point where I believe they're looking for an interim successor to take over to the end of the season. Michael Carrick is going to do the job for the next couple of games, we believe. He's currently the assistant manager.
When you look, Aidan, at the number of Premier League managers who have left already this season...
Yes.
I mean, the whole thing is ludicrous, isn't it? It's like boards are just pressing the panic button. You look at Nuno at Tottenham, who went after 10 games, and you think
it's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, and you think back to the 80s. Alex Ferguson, who is obviously a legend at Manchester United, had a terrible start.
Well, this is the thing, Paul. I mean,
was given time to get his ideas.
Manchester United were never wanted to be this club where they chopped and changed all the time. 26 years with Sir Alex Ferguson, they did not know how good they had it. I said earlier on one of the shows today, he never actually earned massive money at Manchester United in terms of his salary. It was all incentivised. He had to win trophies before he got paid out well, but it was more vocational for him. But at the moment, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer cannot say today that he wasn't given time. He's been given 3 years. He's been given 3 years.
That's a fair point.
These managers also, they want resources. He's been given £400 million. He can't moan. He's walking out the door with £7.5 million, as we said with Vienna a moment ago. It's nice work if you can get it.
Aidan, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, another story, which is really interesting. The Home Secretary is seeking to proscribe Hamas as a terrorist organisation. Priti Patel said the ban would cover the Palestine Islamist group's political wing, describing the organisation as fundamentally and rabidly anti-Semitic.
Speaking in Washington, D.C. on Friday, she said, "Anti-Semitism is an enduring evil which I will never tolerate. Jewish people routinely feel unsafe at school, in the streets, when they worship, in their homes and online. If the change is approved by Parliament, anyone who expresses support for the organisation will be in breach of the Terrorism Act 2000 and could face up to 14 years in prison." I mean, my thinking on this is, it's about time, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I mean, your old boss... what do you remember of the Labour Party? You gave allegiance to Jeremy Corbyn, you know. Your old boss could be in a bit of trouble here because he calls them friends, doesn't he?
Well, he could fall foul of this, and I suspect other people may fall foul. Look, I mean, I have absolutely no time for Hamas at all.
Or Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I think he got... I mean, I have to say, I think he got some of the economics right in terms of challenging your lot, you know, the rich people in the city and arguing for redistribution. Some of that stuff was absolutely right, and I defend him. Where he lost, of course, is the sort of culture war. He had no idea about what provincial, small-town, working-class Britain was saying. But I mean, my worry about things like this is whether it's just cosmetic. You know, if governments just label this particular group a terrorist organisation, unless you actually win hearts and minds, unless you actually try to change the narrative, I don't really see what this is going to achieve in terms of bringing peace to the Middle East. And I also, I have to say, I think when it comes to British government policy on stuff like this, there's an awful lot of hypocrisy. I mean, the British government in recent years has made peace with the IRA. The British government in recent years made peace with Gaddafi in Libya. So you have to kind of take these sort of announcements with a pinch of salt. Yes, challenge Hamas, but the real issue is how do we bring peace to the Middle East?
Well, I think we better go to Northern Ireland pretty quickly and get a view from Arlene on this.
Well, I think it'll be very difficult for Jeremy Corbyn and that element of the Labour Party, but it will be also very difficult for Sinn Féin, of course, who meet Hamas frequently and deal with them in that way. So it'll be interesting to see whether that is actually dealt with, because it is important that a signal is sent that the sort of activities that Hamas are involved in are so wrong, and that there needs to be a strong signal sent from the UK government that that is the case. And I'm pleased to see that we are standing up against anti-Semitism and that we are taking a very strong line on that, because there has been differences over this past couple of years around that. So I'm really pleased to see this announcement. I agree with Deanna. Why has it taken so long? Because internationally, in the US, they have been banned for quite some time. So I'm pleased to see it. People like countries like Iran and places like that have expressed their displeasure. So that really should be a sign to us that this is the right way to go.
Well, you're absolutely right, Arlene. How Sinn Féin respond to this and what action is taken against them if they do go on with their meetings and conversations with Hamas is going to be very, very interesting to watch indeed. Now, former Daily Mail editor Paul Dacre has withdrawn from the running to become the next chairman of the media watchdog Ofcom. In a letter to the Times, he said he had decided not to reapply for the role despite the government's decision to rerun the appointment process. Dacre said he would instead be taking up an exciting new job in the private sector, despite many senior members of the government urging him to try again. Well, to find out what all this means for the media landscape, we're joined by Martin Campbell, who was the former chief advisor to Ofcom. Martin, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, Dacre says that there's no point in reapplying because Ofcom is part of the blob, and unless you've got trendy centre-left views that are very popular in a few central London postcodes, there's no point in applying because you'll never get the job. Is he being fair?
Yeah, I think he's probably got it about right there, because I think the whole thing has fallen foul of the idea that you're not allowed to have right-wing views in a job like this, but having left-wing views don't count as having views. And I think when he probably sat down and had a good think about what would happen at Ofcom, he wouldn't be in the same position as he was at the Daily Mail to click his fingers and have people running, because Ofcom runs very much like its own little civil service. And obviously, one of the things that he would have to battle with is a thing that a lot of people are worried about, and that is Ofcom's definition of hate speech, which it won't take too long, but I'll have to read it because I can't remember it. And of course, he would have to preside over this. And the definition of hate speech is all forms of expression which spread, incite, promote, or justify hatred based on intolerance on the grounds of disability, ethnicity, social origin, sex, gender, gender reassignment, nationality, race, religion or belief, sexual orientation, colour, genetic features, language, political or any other opinion, that's an interesting one, membership of a national minority, another one, property, birth or age. Well, I imagine that the sort of decisions made on that definition that would be made by Ofcom, he'd find very difficult to sign off.
Yeah, I can imagine that too. And there are also words, aren't there, that Ofcom disapprove of. We've been told here at GB News we can't use the term Ramona. I find it absolutely astonishing. I view Ramona as more of a teasing term than anything else. By the way, I've completely ignored the advice for the last few weeks, and we'll see what happens. But generally, there are some government regulators in sectors that are enormously heavy-handed, and the industries that are regulated by them scream blue murder. Generally, would it be fair and reasonable to say that even though Dacre has a very good point, that Ofcom generally deals with things in a fairly gentle sort of way?
Well, it does, but there's a great political blur with Ofcom and the government, as you've come across in the past. The big problem is when David Cameron came into power, he said there was going to be a bonfire of quangos, and Ofcom would be at the top of the bonfire. And of course, what happened then was there was a massive problem with the content of some music videos, so he immediately needed something to put between himself and the problem. So Ofcom didn't find itself on the top of the bonfire of quangos. And then Theresa May, when there were questions raised about the content of Russia Today, stood up in Parliament and said, I have instructed Ofcom to investigate Russia Today. Well, that's not supposedly the role that government and Ofcom have. And there is a big blur between that. So, yeah, it's an opaque relationship.
So who is the hot favourite to get the job if it's not going to be Paul Dacre?
Well, this Nigel is déjà vu all over again. What you've got when Paul Dacre was rejected by the panel, the process was then changed. Remind you of anything? And now it looks as if they're going to shoehorn in Ed Vaizey, now Lord Vaizey, who was Minister of Culture. And he had questions to answer when he was Minister of Culture about money he received from consultancy. That remind you of anything? So, I think probably they'll go for they'll probably go for Ed Vaizey. But I think it's a shame because I think Paul Dacre would have been an inspired choice.
Yeah, well, thank you very much indeed, Martin Campbell, and the thought, I have to say, of Lord Vaizey does not cheer up my Sunday morning. But thank you very much indeed for joining us. One of the big rows of the week, and it's gone on and on and on, has been Azeem Rafiq.
Well, cricketer Azeem Rafiq has issued an apology after it was revealed he'd sent anti-Semitic messages to a fellow player more than a decade ago. The former Yorkshire spinner Rafiq has won widespread praise for highlighting the issue of racial discrimination in cricket and appeared before a parliamentary select committee this week to lift the lid on his experiences. But on Thursday, he was forced to confront his own past shortcomings when the Times uncovered a series of anti-Semitic messages. What do we all think about this? I mean, I suppose for me, it's the contrast between what happened to Ollie Robinson and the response he got for posting messages or Facebook posts, whatever it was, when he was 18, versus the response to Rafiq posting stuff when he was 19. I mean, do you think there has been a bit of a double standard there?
I think there has been, evidently. I mean, Rafiq has clearly given a heartfelt apology. It seems that apology is sincere. And I think given that he said what he said, as unacceptable as it was many years ago when he was a young man, I think we should forgive him. Unquestionably, I don't think he deserves to be cancelled or, erased out of the media or cricket or whatever. But we should extend that same courtesy to others, in my view, but we often don't do that. You mentioned Ollie Robinson. He posted some silly tweets when he was 18. He was given an 8-game ban, I think, or something like that. We've got a situation with Michael Vaughan, of course, where he's been accused of making racist comments. He has denied vehemently that he did so, but nonetheless, his programme hasn't appeared on the BBC since those allegations were made. And I think there's a danger that we end up really with a hierarchy of victimhood. Now, I'm really against all of this sort of Twitter archaeology where people go back through your old tweets and your Facebook posts and try to hang you for them today. I think that, ideally there should be a cut-off period. When it comes to things like employment law, for example, there should be a cut-off period where you can't be sanctioned for something that you said so many years ago. But there's a lack of inconsistency going on, and it's absolutely striking, I have to say.
But Rafiq was trying to bring down Yorkshire County Cricket Club. This wasn't against one or two individuals. As that testimony went on before the committee, he was trying to bring the whole club down. And he received enormous support across much of mainstream media, who always choose to believe that everything about this country is ghastly and racist and evil and that our history is totally dreadful. And it may well be that some hurtful things were said about him in the changing room. I don't doubt that. Changing rooms can be pretty brutal places with any difference of any kind. And it may well be he was subject to racist abuse rather than banter. I just don't know. That was what he claimed. But when you see that he was tweeting, direct messaging back and forth with a Warwickshire player, things that were, and they're there in print. I mean, there is no question that it was very, very strong anti-Semitic stuff. And at the moment, when it comes to Michael Vaughan and all the others, they're simply allegations. So again, we see the double standard applied, and I feel very, very uncomfortable with it. But the odd thing is, there are now lots of Azeem Rafiq apologists. Somehow what he said is okay, because he was very young, as you said earlier, and yet anybody in that Yorkshire dressing room is some sort of villain. Arlene, what do you make of this row?
Well, you know, I think his testimony was very strong in the House of Commons, particularly when he and his wife lost a child and he felt that he wasn't supported by Yorkshire Cricket Club. I think all of that doesn't go away. But to Paul's point about people mining through old Twitter posts, it certainly appears that a different tactic has been used against him than was used against Ollie Robinson, which I think is wrong. I mean, if he's going to send anti-Semitic messages or whatever other messages that have been sent, then that needs to come out. There is this idea that when you come to make a complaint that you should come with clean hands, and clearly he has in the past said things that he shouldn't have said. Now, I think his apology is sincere, but we can't treat him any different than we treat other people.
Well, that's exactly. No, Arlene, thank you. And some of your messages coming in. Paul says, Nigel, I don't mind people not wanting the jab. What I do object to is people intimidating others not to have it. Personally, I have had all three. Well, no, fair enough. And no one here is trying to bully people either way. I think we've all had the vaccine, though, haven't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, here, Maureen says, if people, for whatever reason, will not agree to be COVID vaccinated, that's their decision. However, I do think those of us who have been vaccinated should be made aware of those who have not been vaccinated so that we can avoid being near to them.
Oh, dear,
I'm not sure I'd agree with that one, Maureen. I think for me it's this point about creating any kind of sort of two-tier society. Yeah. You know, we're kind of all in this together, as it were. And yeah,
David tells us, my wife works in a dental surgery where she's at risk all day, treating people close up with their mouths open. She wears masks, visor and overalls, but it's very uncomfortable after several hours. They aren't allowed to ask people if they've been vaccinated. What precautions do dentists have?
Yeah, and they've worked all the way through this, haven't they? Dentists, I mean, whilst GPs have done a lot of consultations online, dentists have kept on going. Irene asks, are all the migrants coming into the country being vaccinated? Well, first they're being COVID tested, and ultimately I don't know whether they're being vaccinated, but I would assume that if you come into Britain illegally, remember that you do get free healthcare and free dental care, so I would rather assume that they are.
And Ashley here says, to me it's a matter of democracy and that the vast majority have been vaccinated, and in doing so have agreed that this is the correct and best thing to do. If the minority are made to have the vaccine, which cuts the death rate, then it's for the greater good, which is part of the government remit. Not sure I'm with that one again, but thanks for sending in your views regardless. And stay with us as we have plenty more subjects to discuss in the next hour. Don't go away.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show, Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching GB News. Coming up on the political correction, the eastern leg of HS2 is scrapped. Joe Biden says he's angry at the jury over the Kyle Rittenhouse case, and a new bill is causing controversy over powers to remove British citizenship. That plus plenty more after the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Simon Pusey and this is your news at 11 o'clock. There's been a second night of violence in the Netherlands with dozens of people being arrested in The Hague. Protesters set fires in the streets and threw fireworks at police as they demonstrated against tough new COVID measures. It comes a day after riots in Rotterdam where at least 7 people were injured. Thousands of people have also been demonstrating across other European countries, including Austria, Italy and Croatia.
So, for example, look at Austria. Austria going down the lines of mandatory vaccination. They would justify any challenge in the ECHR on the grounds of proportionality, and health and national security are pretty much universally permitted by the Human Rights Court to justify interventions.
Some breaking news coming in now, and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has officially been sacked as Manchester United manager. That's after the club held an emergency board meeting following the team's 4-1 loss to Watford yesterday. United have suffered 5 league defeats in 7 matches. Coach Michael Carrick will take charge while the club looks for an interim manager for the rest of the season. The Foreign Office says China must provide verifiable evidence that tennis player Peng Shuai is safe and well. The latest video posted by Chinese state media appears to show her at a tennis tournament in Beijing. Fellow players, the UN and the White House have all voiced their concern for the welfare of the former Wimbledon doubles champion. She disappeared after she made sexual assault allegations against a former Chinese government official 3 weeks ago. More migrants, including young children, have crossed the Channel in the past 24 hours. Official figures haven't been confirmed, but it's believed hundreds have made the journey. More than 24,700 people have arrived in the UK so far this year, almost 3 times more than in 2020. Former Chief Immigration Officer Kevin Saunders told GB News solutions are needed or the situation will only get worse.
I feel that probably we need to come up with the offshore processing centres. That will send a message to the migrants. It will certainly stop them coming across the Channel because they won't want to be flown off to Albania or somewhere else. 25,000 crossings this year. And if we don't do something, it'll be 100,000 next year.
The UK's Brexit minister says the country will need to safeguard its position in other ways if it's not able to reach an agreement with the EU over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Lord Frost says there's momentum for the government to secure a solution based on consensus following a meeting in Brussels with the European Commission Vice President. It comes hours after protesters gathered at the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic demanding post-Brexit arrangements to be protected. Author and political commentator Kevin Meagher told GB News the UK is still weighing up the EU's proposals.
Nub of it is, can that process be smooth? Now, the European Union is saying, look, we're prepared to reduce paperwork checks by 50% and checks on goods coming in by 80%. And that should ensure that there is much more smooth trading between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The question really for Lord Frost, the government's Brexit negotiator and the minister leading negotiations with the European Union and his counterpart, Maros Šefčovič, is that broadly enough?
Over 40s will be able to book their COVID booster jab from tomorrow in England. NHS England says around 500,000 people in the age bracket are eligible for the 3rd dose. The government is encouraging people to take vaccines to prevent another wave of cases. A leaked report also suggests vaccines could be given to children under the age of 12 from next year. The Health Secretary is ordering a review into whether medical devices are biased against race or gender. New research suggests oximeters, which are devices clipped to your finger, can overstate the level of oxygen in the blood of those from ethnic minorities. Ministers are trying to find out if the bias could have stopped patients receiving appropriate COVID treatment. Sajid Javid says any bias is totally unacceptable. A Portsmouth crossing is the first in the world to feature a new system that lights up as pedestrians approach. The crossing has LED panels installed to make it more visible to drivers and encourage more people to use it at night. Its success will be monitored and the concept could be replicated across other parts of the city. Well, that's it from me. You're right up to date. I'll have the latest headlines in around half an hour. Now, let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning. You're watching GB News, and this is the political correction. I'm Deanna Davison.
And I'm Nigel Farage.
And we're joined here in the studio by Paul Embry and from Northern Ireland by Arlene Foster.
We're here for the next hour to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
Coming up this hour, the eastern leg of HS2 is scrapped. Is the north-south divide growing ever bigger? Joe Biden says he's angry at the jury over the Kyle Rittenhouse case. And a new bill is causing controversy over powers to remove British citizenship.
Please, anything you want to get involved in, you can email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet at gbnews. This is the political correction. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has denied the government has reneged on promises to upgrade rail links for the North and the Midlands. Boris Johnson was accused of a betrayal after it was announced on Thursday that the eastern leg of the HS2 high-speed rail line was being scrapped and the northern powerhouse rail link from Manchester to Leeds downgraded. However, Mr Shapps insisted the government was fulfilling its pledges and that both projects would go ahead. Now, I really wouldn't want to be a Member of Parliament for the Conservative Party in one of the red wall seats.
Could you imagine such a thing?
Well, in these most awful circumstances, because levelling up was promised. And it did seem to me, Deanna, that I never got HS2 London to Manchester. I just never got it. You know, a cost of massively over 100 billion just to get to Manchester 25 minutes more quickly. I never got it. But I did think that link up through the West Midlands, East Midlands, up into Yorkshire and beyond made sense. That's not going to happen. There's no levelling up, and you lot are furious with Boris. Is that right?
Well, there's certainly a lot of frustration amongst a lot of my kind of northern red wall. I'm being diplomatic, Nigel. You should try it sometime.
Why? No, go for it.
I think we need to look at this kind of from the bigger picture. Yes, the eastern leg was kind of promised and that now isn't going ahead. Like you, I've always been quite sceptical of HS2 anyway. I think we need to stop focusing on London when it comes to national transport, look at what's going on elsewhere in the country. So for me, that sort of Leeds to Manchester has been something that's much more important. And actually, going even further, Liverpool to sort of Newcastle, Liverpool to Hull would be kind of ideal to get that line sorted. And so there is a lot going on. There's a lot of infrastructure work that's going to be going on, track replacement, electrification, which is going to really improve things. So I think the journey time from Leeds to Manchester is still going to be cut from 55 minutes down to 33 minutes. Under the Northern Powerhouse Rail, it would have been cut to 29 minutes. So realistically, there is still some really good work going on. I think it's kind of been lost in the furore about HS2 and so-called broken promises. But it's got to be about what it means for people on the ground. And if you are travelling Leeds to Manchester and you're still going to save sort of, 20-ish minutes on your journey, that is a substantial saving. But I think we do need to consider this in two aspects. One is bigger picture, how many people are actually going to use this, and looking at even more local transport, looking at bus networks, looking at local rail, and obviously we're looking at opening some of those beaching line stations and tracks at the moment, which is going to be really important for some of those local communities that struggle with other forms of transport. But I think the thing that's really difficult about this is this notion of kind of broken promises, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is really tough. And we know that circumstances change. We know that, from the point of a manifesto being issued and decisions being taken several years down the line, things do change. But I think it's that sort of, looking at the facts that I think it's a cost saving of £18 billion not doing the HS2 eastern leg, and yet London's getting £33 billion for Crossrail 2 when London transport links are pretty good.
There's going to be a sense, I think, of people in the north feeling, with a poor relation again. We've been sidelined again. It's all about London. I understand that sense of betrayal. But I have to say, I've always felt from the beginning that HS2 was a bit of a folly and a really kind of expensive folly. It just struck me that it's something that's probably ill-suited to our nation. You know, we're a fairly small island. We're not France. France is, you know, geographically much bigger than us and can accommodate that kind of high-speed rail system, I think, much better than we can. I've just never really seen the purpose of it. You know, saving 20 minutes off a journey doesn't strike me as being a substantial amount, and especially in this day and age now where people are doing meetings through various online platforms. There seems, you know, less of a need for it than ever.
Yeah, I think that's
work
actually.
From home, yet build HS2.
Well, I think it's a really good point, Paul, and actually something that we probably need to focus on more is making sure that the connectivity along the train routes is actually decent. Because if you're on a train for 2.5 hours, but you know you've got faultless signal all the way through and can do those meetings, does it matter if it's 2.5 hours versus an hour and a half? Really, if you can still use that time productively?
I would love to see the money spent on a council house building programme, for example. We've got a chronic lack of housing in this country. Spend it on building council houses, investing in infrastructure and jobs in the north. That's where I would like to.
Or broadband. What about broadband? Yeah. I bet parts of your constituency have got terrible broadband.
Well, absolutely. Hutton, Magna and Ovington, I've been working with them for almost 2 years now on trying to get decent broadband where they can actually download and upload things, which is almost impossible for them at the moment. There is some good work going on Project Gigabit, etc., but I think we can be going a lot faster.
I think on connectivity, actually, Arlene probably wants to come in there because she certainly has raised issues over Northern Ireland and Scotland in terms of connectivity.
Well, and bridges, Arlene. Boris was going to these grand architectural projects, including, of course, a link between Northern Ireland and Scotland. He's gone very quiet on that one, hasn't he?
Well, apparently the Union Connectivity Review from Sir Peter Hendy will report this week. It was to come in the summer. It's coming this week. But surprisingly, shockingly, it appears that the fixed link between Scotland and Northern Ireland will not go ahead because it is, in quotes, too technically difficult, which means that it would cost an enormous amount of money. The UN is talking about saving 18 billion. It would be billions upon billions of pounds to do that fixed link. And I mean, the problem with this is that not just this Prime Minister, but other Prime Ministers, particularly around HS2, have overpromised and underdelivered. And whilst there are going to be improvements, and Diana has outlined them in relation to the rail network, and I think that should be a great celebration because you're not getting what was promised. Actually, it seems to be a lot less, and that's why people are feeling shortchanged. So I really hope that the Union Connectivity Review from Sir Peter Hendy does actually look at the connectivity between Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England to see what can be done to improve that. Of course, in the budget, we had the reduction in air passenger duty, which benefits those of us who have to come over from Northern Ireland. I know that some Labour politicians were very dismissive of that and said that we should have been concentrating on rail. But because we're not getting the fixed link between Northern Ireland and Scotland, I think me coming by rail is going to be a little more difficult, Nigel.
Well, I think it's a question of how long that journey would take you, Arlene, as well. Goodness.
Exactly. And I mean, we did touch on broadband there, and I think it is important to say that when we talk about infrastructure, it's the infrastructure of the 21st century, and broadband infrastructure is very much a critical part of that. And that's why, if we go back to the confidence and supply agreement that we had with the Conservative Party, we spent a lot of our time trying to get money into Northern Ireland for a better infrastructure for broadband. And there's me plugging my own CNS agreement deal again.
Yeah, I mean, broadband and even mobile phone reception.
Yes.
I mean, I've been to Namibia, which is one of the most depopulated countries in the world, and the mobile phone reception is much better than it is even in London, let alone out in the Shires. And if we're going to spend... I mean, Paul, I get your point about the housing crisis. I completely get your point. But rather than spending over 100 billion on HS2, I think to actually connect up the country and give people a chance to set up their businesses and to be able to compete, you know, with those who've got good cell phone connection, got good broadband. To me, that would be to me the 21st century investment.
It also, importantly, Nigel, it allows people to work across the UK if you do have that infrastructure in place so that all the jobs are not concentrated in London. I know now of people who their job is in London, but they're working in Northern Ireland because they've got good connectivity where they are. So I think that has to be looked at as well if we're serious about taking some of those jobs out of London.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, now on to another interesting story from this week. Joe Biden has released a statement on the acquittal of Kyle Rittenhouse after the teenager was cleared of all charges in the Kenosha shootings. The US president said, "While the verdict in Kenosha will leave many Americans feeling angry and concerned, myself included, we must acknowledge that the jury has spoken. I ran on a promise to bring Americans together because I believe that what unites us is far greater than what divides us." Paul, what do you make of the president's comments here? Do you think he's overstepped the mark?
I think he has. I think it's dangerous territory. You know, people will have their own views on the trial and the outcome. But look, he's the president of the United States, and jury members have put themselves forward in what was a very politically sensitive case. It appears to me they did their jobs diligently and they came to the outcome that they did in good faith. And effectively, having done that, they've then seen their president say that he was angry at them, really, for having reached the conclusion that they did. Now, I think that has all sorts of implications for you know, if you've got a president effectively interfering in the justice system in that way. I think it has all sorts of dangerous ramifications. If you were a campaigner or a journalist and you identified what you considered was a miscarriage of justice, you think the trial was handled badly, you think the jury got it wrong, then of course everyone should reserve the right to campaign and to make that case. However, I think you probably have to draw the line at the head of state. So I do think he's overstepped the remark, and I think that, you know, other people in America will probably think that too.
But he had part of that, hadn't he? He'd actually called this guy a white supremacist.
He'd been on Twitter, as I understand,
and
identified
called him a white
as
supremacist. So I'm guessing that the president assumed that the people that had been killed were black, but they weren't.
No.
They were white.
Yeah.
So it sort of went in the whole stop digging, and yet, you know, I mean, I get what Paul's saying, but isn't this part of a Democrat's problem? That he is having to appease the hard left that have come into the Democrats, you know, just as the Corbynistas became very powerful in the British Labour Party. And over half of Democrat voters this time last year do not like the leftward move of the party, do not like you know, critical race theory, all the rest of it. And the president's ratings are bombing. Now, this barely gets a mention in a British newspaper. When Trump was president, he was in the papers every single day. And Trump, at one point, his approval ratings did get down into below 40%. I think 41% was the lowest that Trump got to. And this was a big sign for the Times and everybody else that, you know, Trump was doing badly. Biden's approval rating is now down at 36% and falling quite sharply, quite consistently. But even more interesting is Vice President Kamala Harris. Her approval ratings are now down at 26%, the lowest for any vice president in modern times. So the Democrats really having big problems in the States, and almost no conversation in this country about it whatsoever. Astonishing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think just to go back to the point about this Rittenhouse case, I think you're right, Paul, and the thing that I find the most kind of concerning about it is that the USA is a country that really prides itself on the separation of powers. So it's kind of constitutionally established to have that real clear separation of powers between, you know, the legislature, the judiciary and the executive. And yet here we have the president, the head of state, commenting in such a way. Is that going to put people off wanting to do jury service in future for cases that could be politically charged? Arlene, what do you think?
Well, I think that's the danger. And I mean, I think Joe Biden has handled this really badly, actually. Yet another example of him handling something really badly. And I think to Nigel's point about popularity of the president, and very interestingly, the vice president, I think that the country, despite the fact that Joe Biden says in his statement that he wants to unite people, clearly his actions tell a different story. I mean, you can't say you want to unite people and then put out the sort of statement that he put out, you know, after the verdict became known. And it is very interesting that there's no commentary around his popularity after the Afghanistan debacle, after everything that has happened. He is still lauded by people here, and I just find that very strange.
Yeah, it really is very strange indeed. Well, after the break, we'll take a look at the number of migrants that have crossed the English Channel this week. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
A cold but a nice and fine day with plenty of sunny spells to look forward through. There will be some scattered showers though. Let's take a look at the detail. The southwest of England, it's going to be a dry day in the east and some scattered showers will feed into the west. Plenty of sunny spells though. It is feeling a little bit cold. Well, let's move to the southeast of England, a mixture of sunny spells and showers. It's feeling colder there than in recent days with temperatures reaching 8 degrees Celsius in London. A generally dry day across Wales with some sunny spells. There may be a few showers for coastal areas and a chilly day with blustery winds. Now, after a cold start across the Midlands, there's going to be some patchy cloud and plenty of sunny intervals throughout the day. Chance of an isolated shower pushing across the far east this afternoon. Now let's look to northeastern England. There'll be scattered blustery showers impacting the region. Some of these could be quite heavy with some hail mixed in as well. A dry day away from the coast with patchy cloud and sunny spells. What about Scotland? It's going to be a bright day with blustery showers at times, particularly across northern and eastern coasts, but also over high ground where some showers turn cold and wintry. Northern Ireland's going to be mainly dry today with plenty of sunny intervals. The odd shower during the morning for northern coasts. It's going to be a chilly day with temperatures about 8 degrees in Belfast. Showers are easing into the evening though with plenty of clear spells, and it's going to be for all of us quite a cold night.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Well, GB News has led the way with the channel crisis over the course of the last few weeks, and much of mainstream media very reluctant to cover the story at all. But that is now all changing, because it makes the front page of today's Sunday Telegraph, and it reads, "The migrant crisis puts Tories in peril. Senior figures are warning the Prime Minister he needs to sort it out, as a poll shows 77% of Tory voters think the approach has been too soft, and it comes as hundreds more migrants crossed the Channel yesterday. Official figures have not been confirmed for yesterday, but we can take a punt on 800 or so. And for last Tuesday, we still haven't got the figures. What are the Home Office hiding from us? So officially we're told 24,700 people have arrived so far, having illegally crossed the English Channel in small boats, but actually the true figure is going to be between 26 and 27,000, which is 3 times the number that came in 2020. On Friday, Priti Patel blamed the EU's open borders for what she calls a mass migration crisis. Well, Priti Patel has been lashing out, blaming everybody, making a series of utterly false promises repeatedly since August 2019. And I've been calling this from the very start. I've been predicting the numbers would rocket. I've also predicted that it would become a major political crisis. And here we are. And Deanna, we were chatting about this before we went on air. 17 times the number of those that have crossed the Channel have been relocated to the northeast of England than the southeast of England. And that's why this issue is national. People are seeing it absolutely everywhere. And this in Brexit Britain, where we voted to take back control of our borders, and where Boris promised, I'm not sure he meant it, but Boris promised, we'd get a grip on immigration and have a better, fairer system.
Well, I think more than that local impact you talked about there, with the sort of disparity between the different regions, I think it's that point about the Brexit vote, and it's the point about us, saying we're going to be able to control our own borders, because people have been concerned about kind of illegal crossings for a long time. Admittedly, the numbers were much lower at the time of the sort of the Brexit referendum. But people, seeing footage kind of day in, day out of more boats coming over, whether it's on social media or elsewhere. And I know you've done a really good job of covering this, Nigel.
Yeah.
It is a concern, and I get emails literally day in, day out from my own constituents. And I've had people from, I must say, Paul, from more your side of the political spectrum kind of, sniff at me and say, oh, but they're hundreds of miles away from the border, so what does it matter to them? It matters. It matters, because this is a point about trust again, and we go back to this point about sovereignty, we go back to being able to control our borders, and the fact that at the moment people are seeing this situation get worse.
And, I've said on this programme before, whatever one's view of immigration as a concept, and I'm very much in favour of immigration, no self-respecting country can allow a situation where thousands of mainly young men, let's be honest about it, are turning up undocumented on its shores every week. And that's the situation that we're in. And people look at what potentially happened in Liverpool last week, and people think, well, it only really takes one person to slip through the net. And if you don't have a robust system which is regulating the system properly, then you give rise to the possibility that those sorts of things can happen more and more. And it does, it does very much, as you say, Deanna, go back to the whole Brexit debate, where people who I believe the vast majority of people in this country, including people who voted for Brexit, are fundamentally decent, tolerant people, and most are actually pro-immigration, provided it's managed properly. And there's a sense that actually still they're being misled by the politicians, still the politicians are not getting to grips with this issue, and I really do think it's got the potential to blow up in the Conservatives' face if they don't get a grip of it soon.
Well, I think we need to look at, as we've also discussed a few times on this show, is realistically what kind of can be done and what is being attempted at the moment by the government. So we've discussed the Nationality and Borders Bill, which is going through the report stage at the moment, which is going to do a number of things to kind of create a system. So if you come to the UK through an illegal crossing, you'd be kind of processed in a different way. We're looking at offshore processing as well, which has been flagged by a few people. And I saw one GB view, which we'll come to later, outlining this as a potential kind of solution. We're looking at different maritime tactics to turn back some of those boats that can be turned back. But I mean, Nigel, how do we fix it?
It's not going to happen. Well, look, so Denmark are doing this right now. And Australia solved this crisis back in 2012. And frankly, anyone that comes here via this method must be told they will not be allowed to stay in this country. They'll be flown off to a location somewhere overseas. And as soon as you start doing that, you'll find people not wanting to shell out the 3,000 euros, the 5,000 euros to the traffickers, and that ends it. Arlene, a quick thought from you on all of this.
Yes, very quickly, just on that very point, Nigel Alexander Downer, who used to be the High Commissioner from Australia in the UK, is writing in the Daily Telegraph about the Australian system today. The fact that once the traffickers knew that people were going to be taken off to Papua New Guinea or wherever their offshore place was to process these people, then the numbers started to drop. So I think this is something we have to really grasp. And this is the first time Priti Patel has actually, when she spoke about it on Friday, recognised that is a mass migration problem. So that has been acknowledged now. And given that that is the case, she will have to take control of, we've talked about the blob, which is the civil service. She will have to take control. She's been saying that she's been doing it now for 2.5 years. And really now it's critical that this happens and happens very quickly.
No, absolutely. Well, a new bill is causing controversy over powers to remove British citizenship. Paul will tell us more in a moment.
Good morning, I'm Simon Pusey. Here are the latest headlines. There's been a second night of violence in the Netherlands, with dozens of people being arrested in The Hague. Protesters set fires in the streets and threw fireworks at police as they demonstrated against tough new COVID measures. It comes a day after riots in Rotterdam, where at least 7 people were injured. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has been sacked as Manchester United manager. That's after the team suffered a 4-1 loss to Watford, its 5th league defeat in just 7 matches. Coach Michael Carrick will take charge while the club looks for an interim manager for the rest of the season. The Foreign Office says China must provide verifiable evidence that tennis player Peng Shuai is safe and well. The latest video posted by Chinese state media appears to show her at a tennis tournament in Beijing. She disappeared after she made sexual assault allegations against a former Chinese government official 3 weeks ago. Over 40s will be able to book their COVID booster jab from tomorrow in England. NHS England says around 500,000 people in the age bracket are eligible for the 3rd dose. And a first UK first for Portsmouth, which has introduced a zebra crossing that lights up as people approach. LED panels are triggered by sensors, making it more visible for drivers and safer for pedestrians. If the lighting system proves successful, the concept could be replicated across other parts of the city. Well, that's it from me. You're up to date. I'll have more on all of today's main stories at the top of the hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. I'm Jenna Davison. I'm joined here by Nigel Farage, Arlene Foster and Paul Embry. And just before the break, we were saying, Paul, that you've got a story that's caught your eye this week.
Yeah, this is the Nationality and Borders Bill that's currently going through Parliament. And the government appeared to have slipped a particular clause in there, Clause 9, which effectively gives them the ability to remove citizenship from a British national without any notice. Now, I understand they've always had that right anyway, and the most obvious example would be the one with Shuai Begum, who was stripped of her British citizenship by Sajid Javid when he was in charge at the Home Office. But this clause allows the government to do it without notice, potentially allows the government to do it retrospectively, and so on. The reason I think it's an interesting story, actually, is because I think there's a problem here that you end up really creating two tiers of citizen in this country. And I think there's a fundamental danger in that. If I, as somebody who doesn't have dual nationality and has just got a British passport, it means that the government cannot do it to me. But somebody else who is also a British citizen and may have been born here like me, educated here like me, may have lived here all of their life, but happens to have dual nationality through maybe their parents or through their grandparents or something, can be stripped of their citizenship. And I think, whatever the good intentions there might be on the part of the government in terms of giving it more scope to tackle terrorism and so on, I think they're potentially creating a very serious problem. Now, I have to say, as a principle, I don't think it's right for any government to strip a British national of their citizenship. If we have got people in our midst who are potential terrorists but have been educated here, have come through our society, then frankly it's our problem. And what right do we have to wash our hands of those people and to say to whether it's the Bangladeshi government or the Pakistani government, there you go, you deal with it, it's your problem. So I'm really opposed to this clause. I think this clause, it heralds real problems for us.
Don't you think?
The numbers involved are small. The first thing I want to,
at the moment,
you say two-tier citizen, but I mean the numbers are, and this did all come around ISIS and Shuai Begum. I have to say, I get the logic of what you're saying, but it seems to me that if you leave this country and go off to fight for Islamic State, you have effectively renounced your citizenship here. You have a new state, Islamic State. So
what I would say, Nigel, is in situations like that, then if the person, for whatever reason, ends up back on our shores, we put them through our own justice system. First of all, we try to understand what it was that drove them to do that in the first place and try and tackle some of those problems, which I don't think we've been great at, frankly. But, we have to put them through our justice system. They are products of our society. They are British nationals or were British nationals, and we should deal with them through our own structures, not palm them off to other countries to deal with. Countries which actually may, they may never have visited before going there for the first time. But as a principle, aside from the practicalities of it, I say as a principle, I don't think any government in Britain should have the right to strip any British national of their citizenship. I think it's quite a sinister right for a government to have.
Do you see this, Gianna, being a big issue?
In terms of this, I don't particularly think that I do. I think it's one part of a much wider bill. And actually, you look at the change that's going to be made, and it is quite minimal. I think this power was introduced in the wake of the 2005 kind of terror attacks by the Labour government back then, which is the right to remove citizenship for people who are kind of not quite convicted of the most heinous offences, but certainly doing things that fundamentally undermine this nation and the values on which we kind of have built our nation. And what this is going to do is it's effectively taking away the need to notify a particular person, because at the moment my understanding is there's a bit of a weird loophole whereby if someone, and as you said, Nigel, it's a really small number of people this does and will ever apply to, if they are found to be in breach of whatever it may be that means they could have their citizenship removed, and we can't get hold of them and the government can't get hold of them for whatever reason, it can't happen, which just seems a bit mad to me. So I think it's more like closing up a loophole than actually a fundamental change in the kind of principle, because that was given up back in 2005.
Yeah, I accept that. And as we said, it was used in the case of Shuai Begum. But given that the bill's going through Parliament, I think it's an ideal opportunity, actually, for people to raise it in the Commons and beyond and say, look, are we comfortable with having and the danger is governments may end up doing it on a whim. This is the problem. The more power you give to government over stuff like this, you might start by saying, well, of course, they would never misuse it. Well, actually, history is riddled with examples of governments misusing powers where people said, don't worry, they would only use these powers sparingly. Look at the Coronavirus Act, for example. We were told when that was introduced, this will be time limited, it won't be here for long, we've just got to squash the sombrero and then we'll relinquish our powers. And actually, they haven't done it. Governments very, very rarely relinquish powers that they've arrogated to themselves, and I don't think this will be any different.
Arlene, what's your take? I mean, I reckon, if you're going to join a terror cell and you effectively renounce your citizenship by doing that, and you say that you're against all our values, I'm personally OK with the government taking the step to remove your citizenship. But what's your take?
No, I'm fine with government taking away citizenship if you've effectively renounced it yourself by your actions and what you're involved in. But to Paul's point about government overreach, I do think it's important when government and when you come to discuss this matter in the House of Commons that we hear very clearly what the safeguards are. What is there going to be judicial oversight of this? Can it be looked at in other ways? I mean, I think that's important for government so that we do deal with those concerns about governmental overreach and that it will be used in circumstances where it shouldn't be used. I think it's a tool that we should have in the armoury in our fight against international terrorism. But I do think that there obviously needs to be safeguards there, and it'll be interesting to hear what those are from the Home Office.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it will, and to see what the quality of debate in the House of Commons is too, because it is, as you say, it's an important piece of legislation. The government are trumpeting it very, very heavily indeed. I'm still sceptical with the ECHR element, but, you know, let's hope there is a proper, full debate in Parliament, which should follow, really, Paul, the lines that we've discussed this morning, and it's important these things get aired. Now it's time for some of your views.
They've been coming in thick and fast today.
Across a range of subjects, and that's quite important. Paul says COVID passports are as stupid as the 10 p.m. pub curfew. They don't work. But what is the Prime Minister Carrie Johnson's opinion on vaccine passports? Very good, Paul.
Well, I'm going to read this one out because it's one of the few that's actually agreeing with me for a change. Lewis comes in saying, I agree with Deanna. I live in Hull and the local rail infrastructure is awful. Hull's a main city in the UK with many key businesses creating great revenue for the north, yet trying to get to the west of England by train is very inefficient. I completely agree with you there, Lewis, and I think some of these savings that are going to be brought in by the infrastructure plan are pretty good, but I still think we can go further.
On the same subject, HS2, I think you'll have sympathy with this, Deanna, as well, being from Sheffield yourself. Hi, GB News. From a little-known and much-ignored city called Sheffield, not sure about little-known. We are the 5th largest city in the country, yet still don't have an electrified railway line to London. While HS2 is a white elephant, it at least justified the electrification of the line.
I mean, it's still only 2 hours to get to London from Sheffield, which isn't too bad on a train, to be honest.
No,
but
exactly.
My Yorkshire accent really came out when I was talking about my heritage. Arlene, over to you.
Yes, and on the infrastructure piece again, Jane has been asking us if they're not doing the link between Northern Ireland and Scotland or Wales, what about some investment in cross-county transport? As someone who got the train from Nottingham recently over to Manchester, I can tell you it's pretty slow. It was lovely in terms of looking out and seeing the countryside, but it was pretty slow. So I do think there needs to be something done in relation to that.
Yeah, Ashley ponders something that Priti Patel is pondering in some of the newspapers today, when he says, surely the blame for slow asylum decisions rests with the Home Office civil servants that stay in place regardless of the government in place. This is something, I mean, Priti Patel is kind of arguing today what John Reid was arguing in Blair's government. I'm going back kind of 15 years now, not fit for purpose Home Office and all the rest of it. That may be a reason, actually, for the slow decisions. But I think what's really making us, people angry about the Liverpool bomber is that even when you fail repeatedly with your claim, you're still allowed to stay, or the vast majority of cases, allowed to stay in the country. And I think that, to me, is the biggest problem here.
There's a real issue with the deportation orders, aren't there, which I know the government's doing a lot of work on, but it's a really difficult thing to try and...
But again, we're back to ECHR.
Yeah.
Again and again and again.
Christine here says, just make the law that says if there's no paperwork, then asylum will never be granted. If they were genuine, then they'd want to keep their paperwork. Well, I think that's a really difficult one, because if people really are fleeing war, persecution, they literally leave their house with a small bag or something. I think we need to be really mindful of that. But certainly we are hearing as well of cases of people coming over on small boats being told to deliberately destroy their documentation to try and smooth their asylum claim and make it easier.
So this is really interesting. So Lithuania this year, 4,000 people have come through the Lithuanian border from Belarus, and somehow the Lithuanians are able to audit who's coming in a way that we're not, and they have identified 24 people that have come into Lithuania this year with links either to ISIS or that other horrendous group, Boko Haram. So somehow, you see, when they get into Lithuania, they do have a passport with them, and there is a means of checking them. And it's when they get to the English Channel that all gets jettisoned. But, what do you think about that? Out of 4,000 people, there are 24 the Lithuanian authorities think, seriously, are of a terrorist mindset. If anything like that percentage was repeated, anything like it, if even a tenth of it was repeated, then we've got a very real problem.
Well, loads of comments coming in. Paul, have you got any more there about the asylum?
One from Peter on COVID. He says it's increasingly worrying how ready people are to surrender their freedoms. The more we allow governments to dictate to us, the more emboldened they become to restrict our freedoms further. Austria is a prime example of how far governments will go if we're prepared to let them.
And Arlene, have you got any more for us there?
Yeah, just on the COVID piece again, I think we've had a lot of response to the COVID story at the top of the show, but this one says we should not vilify people who choose not to be vaccinated. However, for those unvaccinated who end up in a hospital or worse still in an ICU unit, they should be expected to pay a sizable invoice for their care or face prosecution if they fail to pay for it. So that's a controversial view there coming in from Paolo.
Certainly an interesting proposal.
But if you went down that route, you'd say, well, you're overweight, you drink too much, you eat too many donuts, you smoke too. I mean, where would that end? It would be very, very difficult, wouldn't it?
You'd never get any treatment, Nigel, for anything.
No, I'd have to pay for everything.
He can go private.
Absolutely.
Well, let's go back to that story about Austria, because from tomorrow, Austria will be going into a full lockdown to avoid what it's being called the fifth wave. The Austrian Chancellor says the lockdown will last between 10 and 20 days and is because of a rise in COVID cases.
In the meantime, COVID vaccinations will become mandatory from the beginning of February. This comes after several European countries imposed strict restrictions on those who've decided not to get vaccinated. We've also seen protests in the Netherlands and right across Europe about further and future restrictions. And look, I have to say, I think what's happening in Austria is it's hard to believe. And are the government actually going to win this battle? Now, the vaccine scepticism is much higher in Austria than it is here. Only 65% of the adult population as of this time last week had been double vaccinated. Here it's about 12%. But I'm just not sure the government can win this one. We've got 50,000 people who've given up their jobs in the care sector because they don't want to be double vaccinated. Those people have made that decision despite an avalanche of advertisements, of encouragement, of propaganda, of call it what you will, and they've decided, for whatever reason or reasons, they're not going to do it. And I just wonder whether the Austrian Chancellor hasn't bitten off here a bit more than he can chew. And actually, do you know what? I hope so. This is, to me, a massive step too far.
Well, one of the things that I kind of get a bit confused about in this is, as we know, there are some people who medically are advised not to get the vaccination. So how do they go about proving that? Do they have to carry a doctor's note around with them to say, I'm not vaccinated, but it's okay because, I can't because I've got a particular illness or whatever?
I don't know. Or there becomes a mass market in fake ID.
Yes.
No, I mean, seriously. I can see that coming very quickly, very easily.
And I think the issue about vaccine passports as well, I mean, if you were going to a nightclub, would you prefer somebody who has taken a test at the door, may not have been vaccinated, but has taken a test at the door and has been proved to be negative, rather than someone who just swans in, shows a COVID passport, a vaccine passport showing they've been double jabbed, but actually may, at that moment they go into the nightclub, have the virus. So I think there's all sorts of inconsistencies, actually, and it's difficult to avoid the conclusion that a lot of this is just political. That there's no real logic for it scientifically, but the government is just, whether here or in Europe, is just often chasing its tail in trying to ram home a political message.
I think
lateral flow tests, which can give you a result in
instantly.
Whatever it is.
I think one of the dangers of that, though, is the actual bureaucratic factor for businesses. For nightclub owners, they'd clearly have to employ more staff. The queues would take longer to get through. Arlene, what's kind of the response from industry being in Northern Ireland? Because at the moment there is a plan to introduce vaccine passports.
Yeah, we have a plan now that is bringing in vaccine passports. I think it's the 13th of December. The hospitality industry are very annoyed about it because there has been no discussion around how they're going to resource it. I spoke to the head of Hospitality Ulster on my show on Friday, and he was saying he'd been contacted by businesses that own small pubs, and it was going to cost them an extra £90,000 per year to employ people to do all of this. So where is the funding coming for that? I just think that this has not been well thought out in terms of enforcement. How are you going to enforce it? I thought it was very sinister to hear at the beginning of the programme, I think it was the Austrian Chancellor talking about the police will ask you and will stop you and will ask you for your COVID. That is very sinister, I have to say, if the police are going to be involved in stopping people and asking them for their passports. We had two parties here in Northern Ireland discussing it on Friday morning, the SDLP and Alliance, who believe that the police in Northern Ireland should enforce the mandatory wearing of masks. That is madness. We don't have the resources for that, number one. And number two, what sort of a totalitarian state are we going to be if the police are walking down the street asking you about your COVID passport or your masks? I think we've lost the run of ourselves. We've lost the focus of what we're trying to do, which is to deal with the COVID pandemic. But it has just become, as Paul said earlier, we are moving into a space where government are given power and they will always try to take more power. And I think that is very concerning.
Yeah. Well, I must admit, I will not be showing a COVID passport to go into the pub or go into a restaurant in London. I will not be doing it. End of. I'm just not going to do it. And I think, do you know what? I don't think in England we're going to have COVID passports.
No,
Even if we have a tough winter, I just don't think. We've been so obedient for nearly 2 years now. Amazingly obedient in terms of obeying lockdowns and other things. I mean, some have been better than others, obviously, but I just think you reach a point where people say, enough. We cannot go on living like this. You know, we cannot go on year after year living like this. And I...
But Nigel, it's whether these things are effective as well. That's the point I have been making throughout all of this. Where's the efficacy of these things, you know?
And we do have to, at some point, I think I tend to agree, we've got to say, look, we have to live with this. And particularly given that, you know, there's been the Delta variant, undoubtedly in the future there'll probably be various other variants against which the vaccine won't be quite so effective. And we can't keep playing this game of cat and mouse where we're chasing the virus and then it's chasing us and then we have a lockdown and then we don't have a lockdown. At some point, we've got to say, yes, look, protect the genuinely vulnerable, throw whatever resources we've got at making sure that we protect people who are genuinely vulnerable, but we've got to accept that the rest of us have got to be allowed to go about our business and actually make judgments for ourselves. If I want to go to a nightclub, I don't expect the government to be able to, you know, to say to me, well, we'll determine whether or not you're fit to make that decision, whether or not you're going to be safe in that nightclub. I think I'm capable of making that decision myself. I'm long past going to nightclubs, by the way, but even it's a point of principle.
GBNews night out, we'll get you in one again, Paul.
Point of principle.
Well, we found a bit of common ground here, I think, on vaccine passports, and I'm hoping we've got our common ground guest to talk to us about... Oh, no, we don't have our common ground guest yet. We will hopefully come to him. So I want to know, Paul, when was the last time you were in a nightclub?
Oh, my God.
You don't have to answer that, Paul.
Well, I have to say, Nigel and I had a conversation about this a couple of weeks ago. I used to frequent a nightclub in Romford in Essex called Hollywood's, and Nigel used to go there too. I would say he was probably there a lot of years before I ever went there.
A few, a handful, a handful.
It's not there anymore. It's been razed to the ground, but it was great in its day. In my day, anyway. I don't know about you.
I think there was so much joy. I mean, I was there on the night that nightclubs kind of open at 1 minute past midnight, and seeing the joy on the faces of the people there, just so excited to have that bit of normality back. I think it's just been so good for people's kind of welfare, well-being, mental state of mind. And I think the problem with kind of discussing vaccine passports now is rowing back on that. Surely it's not going to be good for people's psyches, is it?
No, and but as I say, you know, I'm actually optimistic. Whatever criticisms we've got of the British government during the pandemic, and there are lots of reasons to be critical, you know, sending people out of the hospitals into the care homes, lots of things we could be very, very angry about and upset about. But if you compare the way our government has handled this, and I'm very mindful of Paul saying that governments always want powers and don't give them back, but even being mindful of that, actually, we've taken a lighter approach than than Australia, than New Zealand, than most of Europe, than California and many states in America. You know, we're not doing too badly on this, is my view on it.
Yeah, no,
I mean, I have to say, I've been slightly surprised at the level of compliance there's been among the British public. I mean, if you think we've got a tradition in this country, and we're known for proudly defending our ancient liberties and freedoms. You know, a lot of that stuff kind of originated here. Let's be blunt about it. But we seem to have given that up in some cases quite meekly, and that's worried me. That's worried me.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. Well, that's it from all of us today. Thanks for all of your comments and all of your views throughout the morning. The Political Correction team will be back here next Sunday at 10. Up next, though, it's Alistair Stewart and friends.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
A cold but a nice and fine day with plenty of sunny spells to look forward through. There will be some scattered showers though. Let's take a look at the detail. The southwest of England, it's going to be a dry day in the east and some scattered showers will feed into the west. Plenty of sunny spells though. It is feeling a little bit cold. Well, let's move to the southeast of England, a mixture of sunny spells and showers. It's feeling colder there than in recent days with temperatures reaching 8 degrees Celsius in London. A generally dry day across Wales with some sunny spells. There may be a few showers for coastal areas and a chilly day with blustery winds. Now, after a cold start across the Midlands, there's going to be some patchy cloud and plenty of sunny intervals throughout the day. Chance of an isolated shower pushing across the far east this afternoon. Now, let's look to northeastern England. There'll be scattered blustery showers impacting the region. Some of these could be quite heavy with some hail mixed in as well. A dry day away from the coast with patchy cloud and sunny spells. What about Scotland? It's going to be a bright day with blustery showers at times, particularly across northern and eastern coasts, but also over high ground where some showers turn cold and wintry. Northern Ireland's going to be mainly dry today with plenty of sunny intervals. The odd shower during the morning for northern coasts. It's going to be a chilly day with temperatures about 8 degrees in Belfast. Showers are easing into the evening though with plenty of clear spells, and it's going to be for all of us quite a cold night.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less.